I'm Albu, and we're going to improve our gaming performance today. Let's start it off with water details. Here is the actual difference it makes. This difference between medium and high only happens when global illumination is not being reflected. In other words, this only happens when we aren't reflecting an image, but only a shadow of an image. Medium to high is also where oceans gain a tidal effect. Okay, now that we know everything water details does, let's see what it doesn't do. In all other scenarios, which makes up the majority of scenes, water details makes no improvement to the water or its reflections. Not during daytime and not during nighttime either. And if you're flapping about in water like a duck, it doesn't affect the way water splashes around either. Therefore, it is no surprise that there is no FPS difference from this setting. It appears the developers disabled the lower quality settings here. The recommendation on this one will be very high because there's no performance loss. Up next is texture details. This setting improves most textures in New World, including grass, shrubs, and trees. Improvement is only from low to medium and quite subtle, and then another smaller improvement from high to very high. Texture details also improves structures, houses, objects, decorations, and most things, but only at a close range. This all comes at a very sizable cost in VRAM, particularly the very high option, as is often the case in many games. Visually, the differences are noticeable from low to medium. Here, here, and here. High has an improvement over medium, but it's not noticeable in this scene. I'll cover that in a second. The very high has a very small improvement, only at a very close proximity to the camera. Here it is again, low to medium improvement and high to very high. Unfortunately, all of these textures are really only noticeable up close, but not at medium or long distances. This is also the only setting that affects character models, and it does so only from low to medium. Honestly, it's really hard to see this on characters unless you're particularly up close and personal and searching for such differences. For the sake of being thorough though, medium to high also improves textures, but only when it is right up against the camera. But this isn't close enough for it. There is no significant frame rate difference for texture details. However, keep in mind this setting uses a lot of video card RAM. As long as you don't reach a VRAM bottleneck, you won't experience any FPS loss here. VRAM bottleneck happens at 95% VRAM usage. If you reach 95% VRAM use, your FPS will begin to drop. You should have at least 9 GB of VRAM to use the very high setting here, since being in a busy town usually hovers around 8.5 GB. If your video card has 5 to 8 GB, just use the medium. You'll barely be missing a slither of detail, and if you have less than 5 GB, you should really consider the low setting here, even if the game looks noticeably worse. Moving on, we have terrain details. This setting does two things. First, it determines the quality of the ground dirt textures. And when I say dirt, I mean dirt only. It does not affect the cobblestones on the ground or any wooden planks or stairs or any structures that covers the soil. Just the game world's dirt. Improvement is huge, going from low all the way to high. Very high makes it even better, but just barely. The second thing terrain details does is to determine to what distance lush greenery will be rendered at. The lower the setting, the easier you can spot stuff in the distance. The lower the setting, the more you'll notice grass loading in as you move around. And unfortunately, even on the high setting, you'll often still notice the shrubbery loading off in the far distance. The FPS performance is significant and linear from low to very high. But unfortunately, the game doesn't look very good when you're noticing every green shrubbery loading in front of you as you're walking around. So low is out of the question even if it saves us a lot of frames. Keep in mind your selection here should also depend on your video RAM once again, because very high uses a lot of video RAM. If you have those 9 gigabytes of VRAM, then by all means you can use very high. But if you don't, then high will save you a freakish amount of VRAM. My final recommendation for this one, even if you have more than 9 gigabytes of video RAM, will actually still be high, because the ground texture difference, quite frankly, is almost indistinguishable. You'd be gaining about 10% FPS, and you'd be gaining the added benefit of being able to see through shrubbery at a distance, which can be very useful for spotting enemies sooner in PvP. Next is shadow details. When set to low and only low, this setting will limit the distance to which shadows are rendered. It does make it easier to see at times and comes with a considerable amount of FPS gain. But playing on low feels almost glitchy, since the render distance is actually relative to the camera angle rather than the character's location. It's incredibly distracting and annoying to play on low. Shadow details also sharpens the edges of shadows at close range, but only does so from low to medium and not beyond that. It also adds shadows to mountains and trees in the distance. I should point out that all of this is almost completely worthless during nighttime, with shadows from the moon. The differences are there, but they are just too subtle. Meanwhile, the FPS retains the same loss even during nighttime. The FPS cost for the shadow rendering distance from low to medium is particularly hefty. Medium to high has no FPS loss, and consequently no graphical difference either. Then we have a second FPS drop for very high. So what do we get for very high? Not much. Basically, some trees and shrubs gain shadows at long distances. It's really hard to justify the very high setting here, as the shadow differences are either often too small, too hard to notice, and, well, it's completely useless during nighttime. Thus, the recommendation is medium. It's well worth it so shadows aren't severely limited during daytime. Anything beyond that is too inconspicuous, so we might as well save some frames. Moving on up, I'm going to bundle post-processing, lighting, and effect details. Now, we're going to change all of the settings at the same time to prove this next point. None of these settings actually do anything. Not on special effects of abilities, not on environmental effects, not on volumetric effects, not on sky effects, not on enemies. Nothing. Not in dungeons, in towns, or in your house, or anywhere. But they are pretty cool to watch in slow motion, so I'm gonna show a select few just for fun. But know this, I tested everything I could think of here because, well, let me show you. Because when you change some of these settings, there is an instant of dropped frames, which tells me something is being loaded. However, after testing everything that made sense and then some, it appears to be just a reloading of the same effects. Truthfully though, it kinda makes sense that these settings cannot be turned down or disabled, because the game would really lose most of its atmosphere if you could turn them down. It's very likely most people would turn these graphics off for better visibility in places like corruptions, foggy regions, and such. This would all be rather advantageous. But Amazon wants the game to look as impressive as possible, regardless how well some people's PCs might be able to handle it. Recommendation will be very high for all three, because that's what they're set to, regardless what you pick. Last up, we have object details. This setting has a huge impact on objects from low to medium, as squares and octagons become circles. Some structures are also considered objects and gain a polygon increase, making them look better. This is another example of the polygon improvement and how much it affects the game world. But it's also incredibly subtle. The only way to really notice is to flip back and forth like this between low and medium. Unfortunately, the high and very high settings here have no additional differences. Not surprisingly, outdoors is also where we see the highest FPS drops for object details. I should also mention that even though most objects will look far better on medium, that is not the case for objects in your house. Everything in your house will have the higher vertex count regardless of your object detail settings. I actually tested this in depth and did find a couple of house objects that are affected from low to medium, but they are just so rare to find that it would be misleading to even show them. Final recommendation for object details will be medium because we get a massive polygon improvement, and since there's no visual improvement to merit setting it any higher, we get to save a ton of FPS here. Next up, I've got one more performance tip for you guys. When we look downwards, our FPS remains normal, but once we pass the horizon, moving towards about a 45-degree angle up, our FPS drops drastically. This is not due to looking at the sky, since the FPS shoots back up when we look directly at the sky.
Some of the coding in this game is trash.
This behavior in New World is consistent throughout the game, although the amount that FPS drops will depend on the environmental effects and the time of day and whatever is causing this. But more often than not, that 45-degree angle can cost you over 50% frames. Unfortunately, I was not able to find a fix for this. So for now, if possible, take the high ground instead in PvP battles and dominate your enemies with better performance if you can. I do benchmarks exactly like this one for many games. My goal is to improve your gaming experience and PC performance. If that's not worth subscribing and supporting, then I don't know what is. Don't forget to like and sub to keep me going. Till next time, happy gaming.